right, great. I think that is my cue. Welcome. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around to 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. I've kept the talk light on technical details and more on pictures and memes, so you can just chill and just absorb it. All right, wonderful. So my talk today is called Navigating the Gen AI App Development Hype Cycle. I'll go into it. Gen AI app development isn't as much of a smooth ride as one might expect, as we learned firsthand and then repeatedly as we build Gen AI apps. So this is a bit of a reflection on that. And then towards the end, I'll talk about how we consolidated these lessons into a really fun tool. So that's just what I went over, hype cycle, lessons, and then a reusable tool. So a bit about me. I'm the founder and CEO of Vartak, technologist/nerd at heart. I started off in ML infrastructure during my PhD at MIT. My PhD work essentially led to ML flow and experiment tracking. So if you're familiar with that space, that's where I got my start, and then did a lot of hands-on data science, infrastructure building, and now my company Vartak sells model management and operation software to enterprises, Fortune 100s, seen all the cloud, hybrid, edge configurations, as you might imagine. And the reason why I'm doing this talk today is since the beginning of the year to now, we've shipped a whole bunch of either AI-enabled features within our product, or we've built them for our partners and customers. Some of these have included AI-enabled documentation for models, text-to-SQL, question answering type applications as well. And so today I'll distill some of the lessons from having built those applications into things that hopefully folks can use. And I generally enjoy building data and AI products. That's what I've been doing for about a decade now. So that's why I'm here. All right, so let's get into it. Hopefully people here are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle. They have this for they release it every year. Different technologies live in different places on the hype cycle. I find that this is a really great analogy for a lot of things in life, actually. So it starts off with there's a lot of excitement about a technology, like GPT, for instance. You know, there's a fever pitch as people try it out. They realize how great it is and so on. Then people start actually implementing it, realize that it is really, really darn hard to get it to do what you need it to do. That's our trough of disillusionment. And then, you know, you power it through and you're like, all right, I'm going to grind it out and I'm going to make something useful with it. And that's where when technologies reach a plateau of productivity, that's like, all right, most people can adopt it and it's useful in the business. The funny thing is, as we built our AI-assisted documentation, text-to-SQL, question answering, you name it, we realized that we were following a very similar process as we were going from an idea to an application that we could deploy or hand over. And so I'm going to map that over to the hype cycle, because that was the best analogy that we found. And then we'll talk about lessons about how to get from this inflated expectations peak to somewhere here. You're probably not going to get all the way to, you know, productivity right away. But how do you try to avoid this trough as much as possible? All right, so what does this look like? How many people here have built Gen AI apps for your consumption, for company consumption, you name it? Kind of, sort of, tried GPT, you know, okay, got it. All good. I'll tell you what it looks like. So this was me when we were building the AI-assisted documentation feature in our product. So what that is we offer a model catalog for models, and a really tedious thing that risk people or data scientists or even software engineers need to do is go and document the model. And words do not come easily. I have a technical background, words just don't come easily. And so that's where my idea was, all right, let's use GPT to actually help our customers write better documentation. So, right, GPT generates text. Ooh, I can actually do that. I hacked this in a weekend evening. That was great. It actually worked. I have a picture or a loom of that later. And it's like, all right, I'm going to change the world because, you know, this thing can document. No one will ever need to write documentation again. We all know how much we enjoy writing documentation. So that's great. I sent a Slack message. I got our data scientist actually working on it. And then we actually started testing it on real-ish looking data. And it's like, oh, shoot. This does not sound right. This sounds like a high schooler wrote it, or this is hallucinations. Like, these are pesky hallucinations, I'll talk about them, but it's making up information. Then you're like, it kind of sucks when you go outside of what you tested it on, so what the heck are we going to do? At some point, everyone is like, why is AI so dumb? Like, this is never gonna work. Because you don't know how to instruct it quite right. You don't know what examples to use. You don't know what language to use. All of the fun things that come with prompting go into that really trough of disillusionment. You stay in there for a while, and then you grit your teeth, and you're like, okay, I just need to read everything about prompting there is. I need to figure out what are the different ways to prompt. I need to go find or label a data set. I might need to fine tune. And then slowly and slowly, you kind of, keep getting better. Better is also an iffy term because this is not accuracy. You don't know how accurate it is. It's some sort of vibe-based, is this better or is this worse type of assessment that you're doing. But hopefully you're getting better. And most times, it ends up with, this isn't perfect, but you know what? This app is really useful. So either I'm going to ship it, or this particular firm is going to use it internally, and so it's not facing real users. This is usually what it looks like. If you're going through this process, don't be surprised. That's just how it goes, because we're still trying to learn how to best utilize this technology and how to best get the model to do our bidding, essentially. So this is a process that we went through over and over again as we were building our applications. And there were some key lessons that we learned that I'll go over next that hopefully will help people get from idea to somewhere here a lot faster. And then there's a tool that I'll talk about towards the end. Okay, 10 was a nice round number, so I've evened out my lessons to be 10. All right. There's a lot of talk about open source, and I'm a big believer in open source. I've built open source before. You don't need to use it for prototyping. If you're trying to build a application and not iterate on the model itself, start with OpenAI, start with GPT. You're going to know what the boundaries are of what is possible. And I put a little asterisk there because there is an optimization you can do, but that should come towards the end once you know what you're building and that it kind of works. And this is just a benchmark. There are lots of benchmarks that compare GPT to open source and so on. Just start with something that you know works fairly well and then iterate from there. So that's number one. Second one, the flip side. Don't be lulled into how easy your initial prototype is or how quickly you were able to build it. That's my screenshot of the Loom that I sent the team, and I'm realizing that is really small for you guys to see. Imagine there's a Loom of the app that I built in Streamlit. It's great. It took us about 3 months to get this production ready. And this was because we had to iterate on our models a lot, on our prompts a lot. The UX is really hard to get right, and I have one point about that towards the end. The UX is really hard to get right because your users are likely not used to a try, fix, try loop. And so your designers will need to think really hard about how do we let the user have control? How do we tell the user what is automatic? What are things that they've written? How do you get consent from the user in order to use an AI-generated thing? It's a really interesting and also hard user interface problem. And so if it's one evening, just know that it's going to take you weeks to actually ship it. All right, third lesson. This one is really close to my heart because my PhD was in this. Versioning and management is super critical. If in ML you used to have notebooks that were not versioned in any reasonable way, need to stop doing that now. Because you're increasing the number of variables that you can give to your application. So you have things like, what is the model? The model has parameters to it, like what is the temperature? Now there's actually a reproducible seed, so hooray for that. But you're gonna try different things there. You're gonna have different prompt variations. You're gonna have different data sets that you're gonna test with, and so records within the data set, IO, and so on. Very quickly, you're going to try, I don't know, we tried about 2 or 3 dozen prompts, and we tried them on different data sets with different models. You want to be tracking how well these things are performing so that you can pick the best one for your application. And so versioning and management, make sure once you start doing this for real, make sure you're doing versioning and management in some reasonable way. All right, related to that, build a good test set. And this is really important. We spend a lot of time building a test set, even on AI-assisted documentation. So our goal was, let's write documentation that sounds like really good model cards. And so you need to go and find good model cards. You need to then distill them to what might be the question the user would write that would create the model card. And so creating the good data set turns out to be more challenging than one would think. It doesn't have to be massive, which is the good news. To get started, you need 5 to 25, I would say, like examples that are a good representative set of what your users might provide. And this does not need to be a labeled data set. So this could just be sample inputs that a user might give you. So this is a screenshot from the tool that I'm going to bring up in a little bit. This was a summarization bot that we'd built. And so the kind of test set we were providing it was, this is the URL that you want to summarize. The tone of the summary should be formal, informal, whatever it is, and the length. You'll realize that GPT is really bad at things like math, and it cannot count paragraphs. So you'll also see the boundaries of what's doable and what's not. But invest the time, because once you have a good test set, it's like having good test cases. You can iterate a lot faster. All right. Most people here, I assume, are software engineers, data scientists, and so on. If you're a technical person, you might be really bad at prompting. The one on the right, the one on the left, sorry, is me writing prompt for write a press release type bot. The one on the right is our head of go-to-market. And you can see how detailed and how refined and how precise his prompt is. I kid you not, like ask your English major friends or humanities friends, they're going to be able to use the right language because GPT is trained on language. The better you are with language, you're going to be able to prompt it better. And so don't do what I did. Get help from people who can write. All right, this is something I hope everyone knows, but just reiterating. We're likely not the user of the thing that we're building. We built a customer service sort of email generation application, not a customer service manager. Our customer success manager said, that's too sassy. I would never said that to a customer. I'm like, oh, that's good to know. I would never have guessed that because I'm not sending those emails. So test your stuff with actual users, not yourself, because their feedback is going to be the thing that steers your prompts and eventually your model to where you would like it to be. Next one. This one is an actual picture of our testing that we did on the AI-assisted docs. You can see a few of the prompts here that were, some of our favorite ones listed. And I think there are different variations here with test cases and system prompts and so on. It was me and my product manager going and trying to label these things. It's tedious. We didn't even have those many data points, but spreadsheets don't scale. And so you need better ways for your subject matter experts, whether they are PMs or customer success managers or whoever you're building for, to provide you feedback. And don't make them look at this. They will hate you for doing that. Big lesson learned, and we don't do that anymore, so that's good. All right. You've probably heard of hallucinations in the media or just broadly. The thing is, hallucinations are not just complete fabrication of information. Sometimes they're sneaky and they're just not appropriate for what you're trying to do. So this is an example of, again, the documentation example. The input the data scientist had provided was, I assume the demographic information is not missing. And so we were rewriting it as assumptions. These two, they make sense. The third one is interesting if you can read it. It says that demographic information is not missing. This means that necessary attributes such as age, education, occupation, marital status are available. Our data did not have those things. We had a couple of columns because for this particular application, we couldn't include some of the columns. And so that's where it's using its broader knowledge, but it's not appropriate for the use case. Is that demographic information? Yes, it is demographics. Should this model be using it? No. And so you do need to look fairly closely to spot what might be hallucinations or just inappropriate information included for that use case. We're getting towards the tail end of the lessons. This happened to us. We were working on a Gen AI feature for, I think it was, again, some sort of content creation. We spent weeks. User could not find the create button. You could see them on, the user interview testing thing. They were trying to figure out, like, they wrote a thing, and they were like, how do I get it? How do I get it to do, to write? UX is super, super key. There've been some really good papers at CHI, the HCI conference, recently about how to build interfaces when you're doing iterative stuff. Just make sure you're getting that right, because that's how your users will use your app. AI is not smart enough to be automated quite yet. You do need a human in the loop. All right, and then the final one. I started off with saying start with GPT because it is the best. GPT is expensive. Expensive if you're running workloads of any reasonable size. Even GPT-4 Turbo that they announced last week and has a much bigger context window, you can see the order of magnitude difference between these two. It's still pretty darn expensive to be using these top-notch models. And that's where I think there's a real opportunity for open source or even distilling these models, which is something we're doing a lot of work on, is how small can you make the model if the only thing that you're trying to do is to go from, say, text to SQL, just how much smaller can you make it? And so after you have something working, optimize your model itself to make it as small as it could be. So those are the quick sort of 10 lessons. I'm happy to go deeper into these during Q&A. I'm keeping it fairly broad, given time of day, as I mentioned. All right, so we learned this over and over again. And being a coder, I'm like, all right, I need to automate this. I hate doing this. I don't want to do this over and over again. And so we distilled the process that we went through on testing a bunch of prompts and testing different models to evaluations and then getting to a useful app. And then this app actually launched yesterday, so I'm just going to reuse the screens from there, sorry. That's the quickest. So if you go on Product Hunt, yesterday we launched this thing called Vartak Gen AI Workbench, or LLM Builder as we built it internally. And our goal was, I want to get to something reasonable in 10 minutes. I don't want to spend weeks and weeks on really pointless prompt engineering if a automated tool can do that for me. And I'll pull up the real screen so you know it's real. I'll just go through what the steps are. And so what we did was we built an interface where the user could pick what they were trying to solve for. Is it text rewriting? Is it text creation? Are you trying to, we have RAG coming soon too. There's a bunch of use cases or translation. You can pick proprietary or open source LLMs there. You then get some suggested prompts because it's really, really hard to know what prompts work or not. And here we're using the prompt generation schemes that are well known and well studied. We're applying that. And then my favorite part is the leaderboard, where there's a lot of iteration. If you've done regular ML before, you'll know that there's accuracy, there's AUROC, and so on. We don't have that in a generative setting. And so instead, we came up with a way which someone noted was very Tinder-esque, is like, all right, swipe right if you like this, this answer. And that's what we do to quickly compare the results of different models and different prompts to get you what works best for your particular needs. And then you can do the same thing after you deploy your application, and your users can then provide the feedback that will be used to power the leaderboard, essentially. And so as we're getting to time, I'm going to quickly show you what that looks like. And it's open. You're more than welcome to navigate to app.verta and check it out with me. I'm going to quickly show that, and then I'll open it up for questions. All right. So I've done this a whole bunch of times. That's why I have. Wow. Can you guys even see that? Kind of, sort of. OK. All right. So I'm starting a project. Let me see if I can. And if the internet decides to work. It might do funky things to our UI, but that's OK. So suppose you were trying to do something that's generation. We did a lot of generation, and so those are the use cases that we built out of the box. You might be doing text creation. You might be doing text rewriting, summarization. You might be doing RAG, and so on. So I'm going to pick something real simple that I need to do a lot, which is post on LinkedIn, and I really dislike having to write things. And so I wrote this for myself when we started. It's like, all right, I want to do LinkedIn. Great. I want to test a bunch of models. I'm going to pick just one because I want this to wrap up in a reasonable time. Let's say I'm picking just GPT Turbo. This is the screenshot that I had picked earlier. And this is so critical because this is the kind of input that you're going to test your app with. So here I'm telling it, I want to summarize these URLs and give me a LinkedIn appropriate sort of message, tone, paragraph, and so on. I'm going to use that. And then prompts. There are so many ways to prompt these things, and each one of them gives different results. And so this is where we use our previous experience and a little bit of AI to give you recommendations on which ones would make sense for you for this particular task. So I'm just going to pick two of these. I think this is teaser. Sure, I'll just pick two. So the two ones are a step-by-step type prompting strategy, and one is a really simple prompt, go do this useful thing. And then it's going to go off. It's going to run these examples and prompts against GPT. And depending on how fast OpenAI is running today, we'll get results back. So I'm going to let that go for a second. And these things will turn green when it's done. Perfect. OK. So now we get to the evaluation part. There isn't accuracy. There isn't a numeric way for me to know which summary I like more. So this is where it's picking using some algorithm, like these two are the ones that I want to compare first. Once you give it that information, it's going to figure out what are the next ones you want to compare, so quickly getting you to a useful ranking of your results. So I'm just going to click through a few things that look reasonable. You would look at it a lot more closely than I'm doing. Interesting emoji situation going on. OK. Sure, and let's pick this one. All right, great. So now it has information about your preferences. If you know RLHF, it's also doing a ranking. It's trying to actually learn a model for ranking. We're not learning a model because we don't have enough data points here. We're using your preferences to do rankings, and this includes computing an ELO score for those of you who are chess players from somewhere. So it's figuring out what is the rank order, and you can go add your own metrics too. I'm doing the simplest bit right now. So now I know that I preferred the standard prompt. I would have thought that I liked the second one, but oh well. The standard prompt worked best. Great. And then you're going off and building an app. So and our expectation is not that this app is what you ship to a customer. It's that this gives you a place from where you can iterate really, really quickly. So I'm going to let it run for a minute. Let's see if it finishes in reasonable time. And I'll show you what it does, and then happy to take questions. It's packaging it. It's going to run it as a Lambda, and then we'll be able to play around with it. All right, I'm going to let that run for a minute. I'm happy to take questions while, oh, there you go. OK. Let's do this, and then we'll. Cool. And I can pick. I'm going to pick some random blog I wrote. Paragraphs, sure. Make it funny. It's the end of the day. What can you say? And then it's going to generate something that is, you would do a lot more evaluations than I did, but that's much more your tone, hopefully, than can GPT, which sounds, at least to me, sounds super like marketing-y. This one also needs work if I'm actually going to push it. But that's an example. That's what we ended up building to replicate and make the steps that we went through a lot easier. It's available. You guys are welcome to use it. You get limited sort of OpenAI credit, so at some point we'll stop you from making a lot of calls. But it's on app.verta.ai. Feel free to check it out. And yeah, that's all I had. I am more than happy to take questions. Yes.
You suggested using GPT for training and then sort of downshifting to either open source or some simpler version. How easy is that? And or does that, how locked in do you end up being, especially shifting from GPT to an open source model?
Got it. I like prototyping with GPT because it's going to tell you, is it an issue with the model itself? Or is it like fundamentally our work, like the AI research is not at a stage where you can try to do the thing that you're doing. And so that gives you a feasibility check. Once you're done with that, then a big part of it's going to come down to how efficiently can you evaluate these things. Because you can spin up the models. That's what I was doing there too. I picked GPT, but you could pick like Mistral or you could pick Llama. At the end of the day, it's like how quickly can you assess the relative quality of those two results and then pick one. So it's not terrible. I think it depends on how accurate you want to be. If you're okay with saying like 60% accuracy, then one of the open source models is going to be just fine, and you can have GPT handle the more complicated ones. That might be another way to go. So the space of how can we optimize the model further is pretty large, but it's not too bad in our experience. All right, I think we're right on time. Feel free to find me after. Happy to chat more. Thanks for staying, guys.
Great.